oh, I have an idea. Oh, I have an idea. Oh, what did you say? Oh, that's awesome. Like, and it was just like everything was like clicking and did the work, so to speak. We
I'm here today with Brody Uttley from Rivers of Nihil. How are you, my friend?
I'm excellent. How are you, man?
Yeah, good. Really, really good. Very, very excited to talk about the work and everything like that, man. I think, to be totally honest, we'll just dive into it, straight away. So my first question would be, what does the work mean as a title?
I think it's one of those titles that could kind of take on any number of meanings. I mean, I think in a broad sense, the work could be drawn to, meaning like life, essentially, like the life is work. Life, we go through each day and kind of have to work through various issues and challenges that may arise throughout our day, and you kind of have to work through those things and learn stuff about yourself in order to get the work done and get on to the next day. And really, like, yeah, when you like cut down to the bare bones of what you know um human existence is like, it really is work. I found myself like listening to this record and like feeling like there's some parallels in the story on the album, between the album and like what we do as a band. Kind of like we've gone through massive shifts in style, and we've gone through lineup changes, and been through the shit, really, and to the top of the mountain in a lot of ways. It's been a broad spectrum of things that we've all that we've done as a band. So I think that this album, the work kind of reflects like the work that we've done as a band. And also, this in a quite literal sense, this is like our biggest piece of work that we've offered to the world. I mean, as far as just sheer like density, I guess, like it's a huge project. It's a piece of work for sure.
And one of the things I did want to talk about was the use of like field recordings and things like that. So what was it? Well, first of all, what are some of the noises that we can hear? Because obviously they sound like they're from all over the place. And also, why did you kind of want to have them as part of the album to create the sound world?
I was just kind of like trying to think of ways that like we could make this record more personal and immersive, I guess. Like really kind of put the listener where we were when we were creating it, I guess. So it started like that, where I kind of wanted to just collect sounds from, tour or home or wherever, really, just anywhere I could find interesting sounds, a noisy radiator or an ice machine in a green room that was like buzzing in some kind of unpleasant way, right? And just really just capturing these sounds that, like, if I heard them or if any of the guys heard them, all of us in the band would like know, oh, whoa, like that was that, like we were all there. But it really kind of took a different direction once we were off the road, and it was clear that we weren't going anywhere for a while because of the obvious lockdowns and everything.
Yeah.
So I really just started beginning to look at the world around me, and things that were kind of that I could identify, and that the guys in the band, especially the guys from Reading, Pennsylvania, would be able to identify. There's a lot of trains on this record. There's a train, that train that you hear on the record is the train that runs by my house, pretty much 24/7. Like any given point of the day or night, I could step outside of my house or be in my house and just hear this kind of like screeching, and like at first when we moved in, it was somewhat of it wasn't a nuisance, but it was just like, there's the train. But like, having lived, where I've lived now for about, I don't know, 7 years or so, 6 or 7 years at the place that I'm at, it's kind of like this like comfort thing now. For the train to come, or maybe there's a lot of sound recordings that were taken from this abandoned industrial park very close to where we live. It was a whiskey distillery in the 1940s through the 60s and 70s. And then in the 70s, I believe, it was taken over by a company that made like different kinds of like chemical cleaning agents. And there's nothing in them but old machines and, you know, weird looking tubes and pipes and wires. And the natural sound in this place is just stunning. Pitch black, by the way, because no light. Pitch black. You can clap your hands and the sound will ring out for 45 seconds. I mean, it's yeah, it's really intense. And like we were up there one day, me and my friend Stefan, who actually played the monster in the Where Owls Know My Name music video, for anyone who's seen that. He's a good friend of mine. And we were just out exploring at this spot because I had grown up kind of going there, sneaking in. It's illegal, you know, so like we're not supposed to be there. But like when I was in, you know, high school with my friends, we would sneak in there a lot, you know, like go smoke weed or like whatever, you know, just like be like delinquents essentially. And, you know, so it was like part of like my kind of like upbringing, I guess. And we went back there during the winter of 2021, early 2021. Probably January, February. And Stefan was like, hey, we should like, you're doing field recordings for this record, right? Like, why don't we catch some recordings here? And we just basically hung out there all day, caught some recordings of like a bazillion different things, bazillion different sounds. Had Stefan, you know, hitting stuff and me recording it just with my phone. And then brought it all home and dropped it into my recording software and kind of chopped it all up. And in some instances, the sounds that we got are like kind of like blended in with like the percussion on the record to like kind of just add that extra layer of like weirdness and punchiness to it. And then in other instances, we just took like the raw files from, you know, these recordings and didn't even touch them, just let them exist in their pure state. Like on the beginning of Terrestrial 4, the whole intro to that, you can just hear these like metal noises and like someone laughing and someone running around. Like that's all just stuff that was caught as, you know, and put on the record exactly as it was recorded.
The things I also wanted to touch on is obviously the theme of the tower. What does it, so it's kind of a two-part question. So what does it represent in terms of the album's context? And then what does it represent to you personally?
Yeah, so, you know, as it's been kind of explained to me, the Tower tarot card, it like symbolizes like a great like unraveling of things, a great change, just a giant shift in one's, you know, life essentially. I think in the context of the record, it's maybe more of a negative thing. I interpret it that way anyways. Like this tower is like the album starts that way, you know, with tower theme from the work, and then it comes back later on the album with Tower 2, which is both of those songs kind of are like connecting like each ends of the record, right? You know, the lyrics on the tower, like the repetition of like, you know, it's my fault I let the season get to me. You know, I see that as, you know, whoever it is that is, you know, the speaker is kind of like insinuating that like perhaps like this season, maybe the winter season, you know, has gotten to them in such a major way that it's caused like this sort of unraveling of their reality. And then, you know, the story of the work that follows kind of explains that idea that like, you know, there's been this massive paradigm shift from within this character's story, and the album is kind of like explaining what that all is about, I guess. And like sonically, I mean, this record is an enormous departure from like anything that we've ever done before, and you know, it very much is like a kind of an unexpected change, you know, and I'm assuming it will be for, you know, people who listen to it as well.
Yeah, I remember, I think on The Void from Which No Sound Escapes, that bit where it's you, right, isn't it, screaming?
At the end, yeah, that's my first vocal performance ever.
Your debut. I just remember thinking, you know, like when you're like, it's gonna fall, it's gonna, like that.
Oh yeah.
To me, signified like the tower falling and that sort of thing. I just feel like there's so many different layers to this record.
Yeah, it's I mean, that part at the end of Void is like, it's kind of a funny story, which like ended up on the record. Like we were on tour, and Biggs and I were at the merch, Adam, our bassist, and I were at the merch table, and the crowd was like cheering like one more song, right? For whichever band it was that was playing. And I'm standing next to Biggs, and I did exactly what you hear on the record, but in his ear. And he was just like dying. I was like, so you're gonna make him fall. Like, you're gonna make him fall. He's gonna fall. And I think when we initially put it on the record, we thought it was gonna be like more of a, almost like a goofy thing. Like kind of just like weird, clowny, like early 70s prog, like guy screaming kind of thing. But like it actually turned into this like really just like dark, weird part that like transitions perfectly into the next song, More, which is a song that's about audience expectation of artists, and like what that does to the people who are kind of expected to continuously pump out new and fresh creative ideas. I went into the vocal booth for that part, and like they turned all the lights off, and they put like these blue stage lights in my face so I could pretend I was like on stage, just freaking out basically. And I actually ended up doing that in one take, and that's what's on the record.
Kind of looking at that artist expectation of wanting more and everything like that, like it must have been really, really tough going into the studio and being like, shit, man, how are we going to follow up Owls?
I think more so what it was that just, on previous albums, including Owls, we had never really had so many people paying attention to like what we were about to do, because we kind of just dropped Owls with like no real warning. And like, we were pleasantly surprised by, how many people liked it and how positively it was received. So this time we were well aware of, I guess, the eyes that were on us this time. And, I think each record, I want it to be different because I want it to, give the listeners like a snapshot into where we were all at, what kind of headspace we were all at as a band and as individuals. We didn't want to recreate Owls, and we knew we like couldn't possibly one up Owls by trying to do the same thing again. But I know that we knew that whatever we did do, it had to be big, and it had to be handled with a lot of care and attention. Because like I said, we were aware that like so many people were, had their eyes on us for what happens next. And I think that we just wanted to make it as big and weird and different and just as massive as possible, just like a whole, submersive experience, I guess.
I was going to say, so obviously, if people aren't necessarily familiar, all of your albums have been to do with the seasons and everything like that. So how did you approach the fact that this is the final season, this is winter? Like, how did you kind of go about that?
I guess we just, wanted to focus on, maybe just like the general kind of elements that, might be associated with the winter season. It makes it much harder to live in the winter, to get through each day, because you have so much that you're fighting against, whether it's the sheer amount of daylight hours that you get, or like the conditions outside. You could have 2-3 weeks of sub-zero temperatures and, brutal ice and, windstorms and snowstorms. And, then every now and then it'll break, and you'll have like a nice, clear day. Maybe subconsciously, I don't know if it was like the thing that was like right at the front of our minds, but I think that because there are so many like warmer moments on this record, contrasted with like awful sounding, kind of freezing cold passages. Like, I think that contrast is something that we thought would really kind of like facilitate putting pushing that winter, that idea of winter across. Closing the album out with Terrestrial 4 was like something that we knew we wanted to do, and like, including vocals on that song, for the first time in the Terrestrial series was like a big step for us, and I think a cool move on Adam and Jake's part. And then, ending the album essentially how our first record began, the spring album, it literally closes the same way that our first album began. And, even at the very end of Terrestrial 4, you can start to hear these kind of like sounds of spring, essentially, which sort of implies that this is all, a cycle. It's all on a circle, just repeating endlessly.
Yeah. Well, I was going to actually mention the artwork because I think it's so, I mean, it reflects the record. There's so many different layers to it. Obviously, you've got the tower, the cabin, and there's the train that's caught in the ice as well. But what I was wondering, what's the sort of, is it the void at the top? Is that sort of a reference there? Or?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, like working with Dan Seagrave for the fourth time now, he and us have like a pretty, we have a pretty good process for like working with one another. We don't really, overstep our boundaries with him because we want him to like have his own take on what it is that we're doing. And I think that's part of what makes him, so special, is that like, we're not like breathing down his neck, like, well, you should move this train over here, like we're, no, that's, the wrong color stone on that mountain, like we just kind of give him a rough outline. And so, I mean, it could be the void in the background, space or whatever you want to call it. It could be a reference to the void from which no sound escapes. One thing that we did want to make sure was, kind of included in the whole final assembly of the album art was we wanted it to, in a lot of ways, reflect our first album artwork, because this is the final, it's the fourth album. This is the last season. And if you look at our first album artwork next to this, newest one, it's laid out almost identically. Like the landscape is actually like all the central points of the art are like in the same location. So like, it's kind of like, could be implied that like maybe it's the same, landscape. It's just like changed over time, and now it's at this point where it's like, at one point it was, just overgrown with like beautiful kind of like green, healthy life and vegetation. And now it's, just bleak and being torn apart. And the only sign of life, is this, glowing window and partly a cracked open door. It's a record, it's a cover that I will always like look at and see myself in that cabin writing this record as everything kind of just tore itself in half outside, because me putting the music together for this album was very much like a bandage for reality. I just kind of like couldn't, I like, the world was just going insane, and I think me being able to have this project to work on was like the only remedy that I had for the times. And it's crazy that the art ended up looking the way it did, because the cabin on the front of that cover even kind of looks like my house a little bit where I live at. So like, there's no way I'll ever, look at it and not think of, 2020. This future we gain through pleasure and pain, it's still going to
things that kind of draw from 2020 but that weren't necessarily planned or written at that sort of time. Do you know what I mean? That kind of are about the record. The
like core elements of the songs, most of them were done before everything shut down, but it wasn't until I think after that had happened that we realized that we were going to have a lot of time on our hands. If we hadn't been forced to, stay home, that I wouldn't have, gotten so many ideas about like the field recordings and going out and visiting these various locations and weaving in all these different kind of sounds. I probably wouldn't have gotten into, analog synthesizers. Like that was very much a thing that I got into over, over the lockdowns was synthesis and picking up some like analog hardware synthesizers. So there was a lot that wasn't, written, as a result of 2020, but like there was a lot of stuff that, a lot of like things that were applied to the record later on, that were kind of like reactions to, having nothing but time really.
Obviously the work kind of, as we've touched on this, it moves from like a feverish nightmare to a lucid dream, right? So what was your sort of like your worst moment in the album's process, and what was your best moment in the album's process?
Worst was just like kind of just the anxiety and like the uncertainty of everything, like, are we ever going to play a show again, which is like a really dark, weird thought, like how are we going to be able to, exist? What's existing as Rivers of Nihil going to look like after this? Like, are we even going to be able to? Meanwhile, we're writing this massive project. We're doing this massive project, and it's a weird kind of juxtaposition of things, because you have this piece of work that you have that you're like really excited about and really, proud of, and you're, just into it in every kind of way. But then also knowing that like, you might not be able to go out and like, do what you've been doing, it might not ever start back up again. Who knows? There was like the separation of us from, live music, which was like one thing, but then there was also kind of like the separation of us from each other, and, all of us dealing with our own realities throughout 2020, and like how that changed all of us, for better or worse. But as far as, positives, I mean, finally, after kind of like worrying about whether or not this record was going to happen, for so long, just due to all the insanity in the world, when we all got together in November of 2020 to start working on the record, and seeing all the guys and like it's actually happening, I think that time during which we were recording the album was like the happiest I'd been, for most of the pandemic, just like seeing the guys again, and like we're all firing on all cylinders, just like, oh, I have an idea. Oh, I have an idea. Oh, what did you say? Oh, that's awesome. Like, and it was just like everything was like clicking, and did the work, so to speak. We made it happen. And that was definitely my favorite. That was like my favorite part.
What for you is the one constant in Rivers of Nihil?
This is the only record where we've actually had the same lineup since the previous record. Every record we've had a lineup change, so like I think at this point we've all gotten to know each other really well. We're very honest with each other. If I tell people like, in the band, I'm like, yo, I want you to tell me this sucks. Like, and I'm not going to get upset about it. Like, I want it. Like, I'd be happier if you told me that it did suck, instead of just like blowing smoke up my ass and like, oh, it's great, dude. Sick, killer, great set, essentially. So I think that like having that honesty for us, that is the constant, right? Just the personal relationships. And just like this kind of like, since the beginning, I guess, this just like overwhelming confusion about like where we belong as a band. We've never really like completely adhered to like any set of, box ticks, for like any one genre. Like we were never like we've always been a band that's been kind of like hard to fit into a box, really. And like I think that this like, throughout the years, just this like sort of soul searching for like what this band is like a constant. And like I think this record is like the closest version to what we are, what we've been trying to become all along.
it's been amazing to chat to you, Brody. Thank you ever so much for taking the time and all that sort of stuff. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Tristan. Good to see you, man.